Hey everybody, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We're coming to you as always courtesy of our broadcasting partner moretalk.tv. Joining me today on the show, I'm honored to welcome back Don Carroll. Don Carroll spent his career working in fire and rescue as a district chief, academy instructor, and paramedic. During these 30 years, he raised a family and pursued the meaning of life through extended study into the Cayce readings and other spiritual, scientific, and philosophical materials. Today, Don is a regular speaker and writer of metaphysical topics from Cayce to the Kundalini. He spent 10 years researching his latest work. It's entitled Sacred Geometry and Spiritual Symbolism, The Blueprint for Creation. Don is also an international tour leader for the Association for Research and Enlightenment, visiting sites of a spiritual nature all across the globe. If you'd like to learn more about Don, you can visit his website at donaldbcarroll.com. Don, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Well, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I want to start off, I know you're quite a sacred geometry guy. You've written an incredible book, and you've been known as a lecturer amongst the A.R.E. community, speaking on topics related to sacred geometry, amongst many other topics. But I wanted to start with kind of an introduction question for our listeners who may not really be familiar with the whole concept. If someone were to ask you what makes sacred geometry and spiritual symbolism so important, how would you explain that to them?
Well, it shows the sacred geometry, which is really, the segue into spiritual symbolism, because you see throughout cultures around the world, all the different spiritual philosophies, you use geometric figures, or symbols from geometry in their spiritual symbolism, hence why it's called sacred geometry. And they all have an incredible common thread of what they're trying to bring across is about bringing heaven and earth together within ourselves. And that is truly our journey, our birthright, and our purpose of why we're here is to bring that heaven to earth within ourselves, to spiritualize ourselves in physicality.
Absolutely. And this theme of bringing heaven and earth together within the individual, you show how it's represented globally all across many cultures, and they represent it kind of in plain view, as you say in your work. Can you tell us what you found amongst the Cayce material and also the work you do with sacred geometry, how the theme of bringing heaven to earth is both consistent within both of those?
Sure, it'd be my pleasure. It's really, it was an incredible journey as I went through it, because in the Cayce readings themselves, you will find truly throughout the thread of all the Cayce readings, the idea of bringing heaven and earth together. That's kind of a general term for, some call it, bringing spirit into the physical. The idea of raising our higher consciousness to, our consciousness to be in touch with the universal or God consciousness. And this is, truly the thread that you find through the Cayce readings in multiple different quotes. He'll talk about, the purpose that we have here, and that purpose is to have a conscious connected and a direct connection, with the God consciousness, to spiritualize ourselves. And I can say, probably you might say the bookends that examples this in the Cayce readings is if you go to, say, one end of the Cayce readings where he had an incarnation as the high priest Rata in ancient Egypt, and he puts the date in the readings at 10,500 BC, he states in there, he was involved with the construction of the Great Pyramid, and the purpose of the Great Pyramid being a site of initiation. Actually, in the readings, they say this is where John the Baptist and Jesus the Christ went for their final initiations. And it's about raising that higher consciousness, that God consciousness, truly spiritualizing ourselves, being directly connected. And you could say, remembering, we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And in that Rata aspect of it, of the purpose of the Great Pyramid example, even the Egyptologists themselves say, and I quote here Dr. Mark Lerner, who's considered the premier expert on Egyptian pyramids and has a great book, The Complete Pyramids, states the purpose not only for the Great Pyramids, but all pyramids, and quoting him, is to bring heaven and earth together. That's what they were modeled for. And in my research, and it was one of, again, hidden, it's all around us, hidden in plain sight. I mean, where we almost don't, this quote unquote secret, but a secret that is, again, we almost make it a secret because it's right in front of us. Even Cayce's name in that earlier incarnation, he was Rata. Well, if you look into the hieroglyphs of Rata, Ra, what probably most recognized, was the sun god of the ancient Egyptians. He represented, the sun god. He represented the heavens. He represented the universe. And Ta in the hieroglyphs translates as earth or land. So his name itself was Rata, heaven and earth. And then if you go to the other end, say, what I call these bookends, when Cayce gave a whole list of readings, I believe there were 22 in total, about Revelation and what the symbolism in the Bible of the portion of the Bible on Revelation was about. What he states in the readings was this wasn't an end of the world. I mean, apocalypse actually means revelation, to reveal. And he states there was a symbolic writing of the struggle within ourselves to raise that higher consciousness, as he would put it, to spiritualize ourselves, to spiritualize our physicality, to bring heaven and earth together. I mean, even in Revelation, it talks about, the New Jerusalem and heaven coming to earth, the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven to earth, bringing heaven and earth together. So even, in these bookends, you could say, here is this, incredible thread in there. And that's through, again, you'll find this thread throughout the readings. It's really incredible. And even to the point where I found outside of the readings, because along with, these over 14,000 readings that Edgar Cayce gave through his lifetime, these psychic intuitive readings, in his own letters, in one of his letters to one of his friends, he writes, and I quote, my purpose, Edgar Cayce speaking, if I know it, is to discover the truth and to find out how or in what matter may be given for seekers for their own expression of the cosmic mind and materiality. So whether he was in readings or in his, daily conscious writings, the idea of bringing heaven and earth together runs throughout them, both in the readings and in his daily thinking. And you might say a sacred geometry example exactly there, because in the readings, Edgar Cayce didn't call this sacred geometry, but he talked about the symbolism of different geometric figures. And in one case, in a reading, he talked about the symbolism of triangles. And interestingly, how he put it was, he called it the symbol that is the pyramid, which would be a three-dimensional triangle, and the inverted pyramid. So a pyramid, or a triangle facing upward to point upward, and an inverted pyramid, which would be a triangle pointed downward, oversame. So you put one on top of the other, would indicate spirit entering into matter. What we're talking about here. And so when you put a triangle or a pyramid and another triangle or pyramid over the top of it, inverted, it creates the six-pointed star, which we probably are more familiar with in the Judaic tradition as being, the Magen David, the Star of David, or the Seal of Solomon, depending on where you look. Here is this, core symbol of Judaism, and this geometric symbol that Cayce describes as representing spirit entering into matter. And looking at those two triangles separately, the representation of the Trinity. The upper triangle being the concept of God in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is that example, and of a human consisting of mind, body, and spirit. And you put them one over the top of the other, you get this six-pointed star, again, the Magen David, but it's also known as the Creator Star in sacred geometry, which is very appropriate. And even if you go into the Eastern traditions, into the Hindu traditions, they have the six-pointed star, and you find it in many cultures, but a great example in the Hindu tradition, the six-pointed star is called the Shatkona, or Star of Galatka, and the Shatkona represents the supreme being coming together with Mother Earth, heaven and earth coming together, just as Cayce was saying, in this example in the readings, but just one very straightforward, example in spiritual symbolism, whether Eastern or Western.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, Don, you've talked a lot about sacred geometry and this whole idea, this theme of bringing heaven and earth together. But I'm curious, how does that apply practically for some of our listeners? When you talk about bringing heaven and earth, how do you use that in your personal life practically? This is such a beautiful philosophy, and how can one apply it?
And that is a great question, because, so often we see these things and it's like, okay, a great idea, how do we get there? And that whole idea through all the different cultures, as I said, whether it's the Hopi, whether it's Hindu or Buddhist, whether it's in Christianity, whether it's in Judaism, because there are many of these concepts, they all had the concept of the axis mundi, which was the symbol of bringing heaven and earth together. And how we do that is invariably in all of these cases, it comes down to, I would say, at the basic level, it's about meditation, about really mutually participating with the idea of God consciousness, of universal consciousness, of taking the time, not only in prayer and understanding, that we are truly spiritual beings, not physical beings. This is a temporary state, a state that we have in order to consciously evolve and to grow into that kind of God consciousness, as Cayce would put it, to know oneself, to be oneself, yet one with the whole. It's connecting with that consciousness is what I found in my experience, and what Cayce speaks about in the readings, and they'll use different names, but all the different philosophies, it's about meditation, going to that quiet place within ourselves and setting an ideal of, oneness or love, something along those lines, to allow our daily consciousness to subside, to get to that higher place, and through meditation, reach that connection to spiritualize ourselves, to be our true selves, our better selves, our higher selves. And I use that meditation as that example. And now, it's been around for thousands of years in all cultures, whether you want to call it contemplation or meditation, lectio divina. It's there, and of late, it's now called, and it's being accepted more mainstream, though it's been around, I would say, in the Western traditions, very popular since the 60s and 70s. It's now, they're using a term of a type of meditation called mindfulness, and it's being accepted by corporations. It's being studied, and military are using this and finding the successes. They're actually finding physical results, let alone the you might say from spirit goes into mind and and then affects the body, that physically they're finding meditation reduces stress, reduces blood pressure, reduces heart rate. It strengthens the immune system. There's actually studies that, scientific studies that they're finding that it actually develops and strengthens the brains, creates more neuron connections, and they found evidence that it actually enlarges the brain in certain areas. I think it's Brodmann's, in brain areas, Brodmann's areas 9 and 10, which are connected to our higher consciousness, our higher thought processes, and more holistic type thought processes. And the amygdala, the emotional part, that it actually strengthens and develops them. And it's also an area of altruism, of helping others. And what it does, even just physically, what it does for our lives is being shown more and more, the incredible effects. But that's just the physical. If we go into really the rest of it, our mind, our spirit, it then connects us with that higher self. I mean, even and there are many. One example, T.L.D. Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest, but also an anthropologist and paleontologist. He's probably most famous in that area for his research and work with the human evolution and work with the Peking man. Wrote an incredible book called The Phenomenon of Man, where he talks about what we're here for, and he himself in this kind of scientific aspect of it and spiritual aspect of it is to develop our consciousness evolve into a higher consciousness of where we'll really come into what he called a new sphere, of the ability to be connecting with everyone else's consciousness, and that will evolve into what he called an omega point, which is then reconnecting to our birthright, so to speak, or our start as reconnecting with the universal or God consciousness. It kind of, as I said in the Cayce writing himself, let alone the readings, about bringing the God consciousness, that cosmic consciousness, into materiality within ourselves, because we are individual yet part of that.
Absolutely.
I hope that answered the question.
No, it absolutely did. Thank you. I love how thorough you are with your answers. It's great. And you connect so many dots within your answers, which is great as well. What I'm gathering about this idea of sacred geometry and how prominent it is throughout all these ancient cultures, they truly understood what we were here for, and they truly epitomized it in everything around them, including their architecture, as you so clearly point out in your work. I guess that begs the question then, if it was so ingrained in their culture, what happened? Where did it go wrong, and why did we forget the philosophy behind sacred geometry of bridging heaven and earth?
Again, another excellent question. Why it seems to, and I think you're right. We've forgotten. We've gotten this amnesia to our true selves. What has happened there? I think it's, and again, the Cayce readings actually, put it pretty very well. He puts forth in the readings that when we were consciousness, when we weren't physical, when we were a consciousness, when we were spirit beings, pure consciousness, that's where the fall occurred, so to speak, and because we had the ability as consciousness to experiment with, to enter into physicality and experience physicality, which can be quite an aphrodisiac. I mean, but then we got so deep into it, we got entangled in it, and we lost our way. We forgot our home. We got so involved in physicality, we forgot what our true selves was. I mean, talking about meditation and stuff, there. An example of that is, in brain waves, our daily living, when we look at everything, we have what they call beta waves that are very prominent. And when we meditate, those beta waves drop down and alpha and theta waves increase. We kind of pull ourselves away from that physicality. You can almost, in some aspects, I look at it as you can say that we become physical junkies to physicality, physical addiction, that we get so deep into the physicality, we get so involved in it, we've forgotten everything else. It's kind of, you can look at physicality as like, if all you have is a hammer, well, everything in the world looks like a nail. And so we forget, and we have this amnesia, but we forget, but there's something that calls to us in that, something that we see these symbols, and we seem to have a response to them, and quite often not knowing why we have this response or why we're pulled to them, why we always feel that, there's more to this than that, and then trying to understand what that is. So we're kind of, not kind of, we're finding our way back, and if we allow it, the physical experience can actually help us there. But sometimes we get so deep into it. It was funny one time when I was in Egypt and I was leaving, and had gone to the Great Pyramid and Luxor and Abydos and all those incredible ancient sites in Egypt. One of the things I noticed is when you go into the Great Pyramids or some of the other pyramids, incredible structures, but could be considered very utilitarian. There's no hieroglyphs in them. There's no frescoes. There's no painting in them. There's no art. They're very, very clean and precise in that aspect. But then if you go into the King's Valley where all the tombs are, or if you go into any of the temples, everything is covered with hieroglyphs, the ceilings, the pillars, the walls, absolutely everywhere. And I got this almost sad sense that they'd realized in their aspect they had lost, this connection. And they were putting all these writings and these symbols and hieroglyphs up, trying to remember it, trying to find it again, and trying to leave a message for the rest to find this. Because I think the difficult part is an experience. Any of us, and I think all of us at some time in our life have had some kind of, ecstasy-like experience, whether it's, a birth of a child or, watching a sunrise or being at the Grand Canyon, something that just is so incredibly awe-inspiring that when we try to share it, all we have are words and symbols, and we're trying to share things that are beyond words. Ezekiel's vision, you see him trying to describe something that we don't have words for. It's, where we go into the experience, all these sites, and to me what it is all these sites that we talk about, the spiritual symbolism and these sacred sites around the world are the remnant, of trying to help us remember to go into the experience. That these are external physical sites, and words, and because words themselves are just symbols, but to try to give us the information into knowledge, with that knowledge go into the experience, and the experience then kind of in an alchemy type way morphs into wisdom and into that higher consciousness. But it's having that experience and then trying to share it. Words are not enough, though. They're kind of signposts, to have that experience. It was in general semantics. They say the map is not the territory. The word is not the thing in itself. We can kind of look at all these symbols and all these incredible sites for this purpose of bringing heaven and earth together as the map It's not the territory. We have to have the experience to be in the territory, and the best we can do bringing back to share with others is to draw a map through symbols or words. So I think, we've forgotten this. We got ourselves steeped in physicality. How often do we all, it's easy to get so wrapped up into the day-to-day experiences of daily living, so to speak, that we forget, the greater things. We get so distracted. You might say, our monkey mind gets so distracted with the baubles and things around us that we forget that, this is just a temporary way station. This is all truly symbolic. We live in a very symbolic world. That the true existence, our true existence, is in that higher selves, that greater consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Thank you, Don. I want to switch gears just a little bit here, and you talked about your visit to Egypt, and you've traveled really all around the world to these sacred sites, and what you make it very clear to our listeners here is that it's important to, if you are able to make it to these sites in your lifetime, because you do have a truly incredible experience that you can't put into words in these sites to be there and to experience it. You're an international tour leader for us here at the A.R.E, and you visit sites of spiritual significance, as I said, across the globe. Can you tell us a little bit about your upcoming tour and kind of why it's so important that people visit these sites and go on these tours?
Well, the sites are incredible around the world. I mean, they really are awe-inspiring, and I love going to them, and I love sharing them with others. The tour I have coming up is going out to the end of October. Is going out to the southwest into the cliff dweller areas of the ancient Pueblo and cultures. The ancestors of the Hopi and the Zuni, and what you find, what I find in there, and I think others, is that why, as you see, not only their homes, their ancestral homes, but their sacred sites, their kivas, these sites as examples in Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon, that are an incredible mix. They didn't separate, you might say, their science from spirituality. They brought them together in a really beautiful fashion, because the example anywhere, but the example of this upcoming tour with the cliff dwellers, and what they built is incredible. That has lasted thousands of years, and you have to think, this wasn't something that was just thrown up. These people were incredible engineers and architects, and astronomers. They were scientists, but they incorporated it into their spirituality, and you find that. As I mentioned, a perfect example is the Hopi, which is one of the direct descendants of these ancient cliff dwellers that have continued with their spiritual philosophy through these years. They still have their kivas, and their traditions. And, they talk about in their creation stories, they see themselves, and they've emerged into what for them is now the fourth world. And their creation stories, as they went up through the first and second, third worlds, it's the same story, that they lost their connection, their God connection. They lost their universal consciousness connection. And they specifically talk about that. They talk about a time when they had a direct connection with the God consciousness through an opening, as they describe it, in their top of the head, similar to the fontanelle of a newborn, that is the soft part of the skull at the top of the head, and that they were able to have direct connection and communication with this God consciousness. And as they lost their way, got deeper into physicality, and that heavier physicality closed this opening, and they lost their connection, and so they had to find it. Interestingly, one of the Hopi creation stories of coming up into this fourth world, just very briefly, is they knew they had to, and it was always upward, so they knew they had to raise themselves, or raise their consciousness, but they were trying to find a way to do it, and they brought the nature spirits and their deities in. And the final solution to get to this higher place was they spiritually grew a reed that went up to the sky, that could handle it. Trees, other things wouldn't work, but this reed would. And how they raised themselves. And a reed is the American version of bamboo, or the North American version of bamboo. But how they even traveled up to this site was when one of the spirit animals chewed a hole in the side of the reed, so they would climb up through it to the top, which was called, when they emerged into this earth, the symbol is the sipapuni. And in their kivas, at the base, in the center base of their kivas, which is a half dug out, half buried sacred place, usually with a flat, but often with a domed top, that could be entered into through the very top of it. And at the bottom of it, on the floor, was a small hole that represented the sipapuni, or the place of emergence, where they came up into this. When you start looking at that, it's like, wow, they're talking about, what the Eastern traditions called raising the kundalini, the coiled serpent, through meditation, or different processes like that of the central nervous system up through the spine. And the reed, or that bamboo, is a perfect, symbolic example of raising oneself up through your central nervous system, through your spine, to your higher self. And then the kiva and the dome, representing, the head, the brain, the mind, and the opening at the top, reopening their connection with the God consciousness of raising themselves up. And you see these kivas incorporated throughout their structures, just incredibly beautifully so, as just one example. So you see that these sites that they knew and I would say compared to some other civilizations, their construction was incredible, but much more organic, one could say. And they were using and these sites and these kivas as a place of sacredness, a place to raise that God consciousness, and truly a beautiful example of raising that higher consciousness through our central nervous system, that kundalini. And you see it throughout these sites. It's really just incredible, beautiful sites. There's a definite awe there, and you can feel it. And yes, these sites, as you said, I go to them because I feel that awe, and I can feel that experience, and I try to share it there. But it's also something we can take home with us. This is, that something that is within us. So we can, these kind of, you might say, help energize it, or help focus us, and help us remember what our journey and what our purpose is about. So they are really incredible. And you see all, again, whether it's in symbolism or their sacred sites, the purpose of these were to help us on that internal journey.
Absolutely. And this internal journey, what we've been talking about this whole show, of this idea of bridging heaven and earth within us, within the individual, it's a huge theme of your book, and we've talked quite a bit about your book. Most of everything we've talked about is really contained within your book. It's such a thorough piece of work. This book, though, you had actually just written it last time you were on the show, so you hadn't gotten a chance, hadn't been released yet, you hadn't gotten a chance to get any feedback. So now I'm curious personally, since it's been out for a little while now, what has the feedback been like, and has any new developments came out of the book?
Well, the feedback's been very positive. It's something, because again, it was like 10 years to research and put together, and frankly, I was so amazed that a lot of my time was spent trying to prove things I was finding wrong, because I felt it was important to have the information as valid and as strong as possible. But it's so encompassing, because this is something that's found globally throughout all the different spiritual philosophies, that it continues to grow what I find within myself and what I'm finding, and I do get a bit of a laugh because friends said, them knowing me, because again researching this, they kind of laughed. There were like, I think, 26 pages of citations, because I want people to see that look for yourself. This is what it's all about, and just how different cultures took their perspectives of it, and how the Cayce readings show it all. And and I do continue to find the example, like if I'm speaking of the Hopi, and finding how these cultures shared the spiritual purpose. I mean, not only their symbolism, their purpose of sacred sites, but in the book I speak about measurements and why they use certain measurements, and where they came from, and it was such an incredible incorporation of all these different aspects, and shared globally, that to me are awe-inspiring, and help me in my own personal journey, because what most people have said to me, and I have to smile, because it was 10 years, but they're like, how did you put this all together? How did you connect these dots, so to speak? And part of me thinks is, that's the human nature, that we see these connections. As far back as you can go, humanity looked up at the stars and could see, so much in them, and they named the constellations. I mean, we have this ability, we almost have this innate drive that we know there's something more, and something that connects us more, and we're trying to figure it out and find out what it is. And and ironically, it's all around us, but we just get. I shouldn't say we just get, but it's so easily to become distracted from that. But as she says, it goes on, like it's kind of in the Cayce readings, from Rata to Revelation, where this theme is in there in so many different aspects. And as I've researched more into the cliff dwellers and Hopis, just very briefly, I spoke about a unit of measurement that the ancient Egyptians used, and the evidence that it was used in the Great Pyramid as an example. A unit of measurement called, they call it cubits nowadays, but that's actually a Latin term meaning elbow, but ancient Egyptians called it their unit of measurement a me, but there's one called an akume, meaning spirit measurement. And I think this unit of measurement of 27.5 inches represents that. And that why 27.5 inches, through my research, that finding that ancient measurements were all developed from body parts, body proportions, the foot from 12 inches from the foot, center of your chest out to the end of your arm, was the codification of a yard. We still measure, horses by hands. What I find is, where 27.5 inches come from? Well, from my research, and there's very good evidence for it, that was determined off the length of the spine, which would make perfect sense for these sites. The length of the spine, representing that kundalini, representing meditation and raising, the avenue to raise our higher self, would be the perfect spirit, as the Egyptians called it, measurement, to create sacred sites and to incorporate everything of the construction and purpose of the sacred site to that. And it, works incredibly in the Great Pyramid. And you go to the Maya, and the Maya had a unit of measurement, and this is from the Mayan archaeologists, called the Zapal. And the Zapal is plus or minus 5 centimeters, about 55 inches, which is then 2 of these 27.5-inch cubits. It's the same unit of measurement, just doubled, which matches a significant symbol for them called the double-headed serpent bar, which was their axis mundi, their connection to heaven and earth. Whoever held the symbol of the double-headed serpent bar was connected to heaven and earth for, the shaman, a holy one, bringing that consciousness within themselves. And of course, being a double-headed, two-headed, two serpents, well, why 55 rather than 27 and a half? And in my, some of my latest research, being that we know there was a connection between the cliff dwellers in Mesoamerica, they found jars with the remains of cocoa, which is down in Mexico in the Mesoamerican area. They found skeletons of macaws and feathers of macaws, which come from Mesoamerica, that we know there was a great communication and trade, over thousands of miles between these different cultures. And so using that South American or that Mayan Aztec unit of measurement of 55 inches, it works incredibly well measuring their kivas. And I was at salmon ruins in New Mexico and was able to get, because one of the difficulties is getting accurate measurements of these sites, was able to get from the a very nice gentleman, Larry Armstrong, if I remember correctly, some of the accurate measurements of some of the rooms of the great houses and stuff and the kivas. That 55 inches of the Mayan works very well with them. So we have this connection that's almost like a international unit of measurement that's shared in Egypt. It's shared at Stonehenge. I've found evidence for it, clearly in the Maya, and evidence for it with the cliff dwellers. So it's this shared, in ancient times, this shared journey of trying to bring humanity and bring ourselves, both as humanity, as individuals, into that higher consciousness, into that universal consciousness, the creative forces, as Cayce spoke of, or as Chardin spoke of, as the Noosphere and Omega point. So yeah, it's just amazing, this the length of this in all these aspects, whether it's spiritual symbolism, whether they're structures, whether they're units of measurements, of this journey of, you might say, coming back to our birthright of this connection of our higher selves, of our spiritual selves, with the universal consciousness.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And Don, I think in listening to you, one of the things that is very clear, or should be very clear, is that you are a true devoted seeker of truth and wisdom. And that's what I really love about your work, and I love about listening to you talk. I guess in saying that, as a devoted seeker, what message do you have for all those other seekers who are out there? Somebody who may be struggling, maybe somebody who just recently got introduced to the Cayce material, or this is their first introduction to sacred geometry. What advice would you have for somebody like that who's kind of just getting into this, getting introduced to these ideas?
To take one's time. I mean, I've been on this, like you said, seeking on this journey for, long before I wrote this book. And the book itself, to bring it together, was 10 years, and I'm still evolving myself. And to take one's time, in kind of the Buddhist traditions, where they said, it's the middle road, and the example was when Buddha was trying to find enlightenment, he tried he came from kind of a hedonistic life and went to a very ascetic life and wasn't finding it, and he was, meditating under the Bodhi tree. And as the tale goes, a raft with a father and son, but with a nearby river, was going by, and as the father was trying to teach the son how to tune and play a sitar, and he was telling his son, don't tighten the string too tight, it'll break, but if it's too loose, it won't play. It just has to have enough tightness, tension to it. And it led Buddha to help him to his enlightenment, because it's that middle path. And so, have patience with oneself, give oneself time. This isn't a race. This isn't something that goes to the fastest. This is something that, we evolve in within ourselves, and give ourselves that time and patience, and don't beat ourselves up in the process, because it does take time. And it's in another aspect, it's a wonderful journey that you don't want. It's not a race. You want to savor it. You want to savor it. It's about the experience and developing the experience, and you want to savor that. I mean, when you look at this, like bringing heaven and earth together, it can seem overwhelming. But there's that other old saying of how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So this journey, just like this journey, is one step at a time, and we'll all get there. And some may get there, quote unquote, sooner than others, but we'll all get there. It's just about having that patience, realizing that there is a journey, realizing that we have this birthright, realizing that we can raise this higher consciousness within ourselves, and that we can do this. And as I put back to meditation, it's like many people after they read my book, like I said, they were like, how did you put all this together, all these different aspects? And as the best I could answer such a question that could go on forever it was a combination of meditation, inspiration, and perspiration. And that's the journey where it's all there for us to take, and it's all there for us to have. And it'll take some meditation, which will lead to inspiration, but there's a lot of perspiration involved in it also, but that's okay. That's how we experience it. We can have the knowledge, and kind of as I said earlier, all it is knowledge, and it's a wonderful knowledge. It's that map to the territory, but then we have to give our times to have the experience and allow the experience, savor the experience, to start turning it into that wisdom, into that higher self. So, have patience and just that one step at a time, and it will come. And it is wonderful. The things I've found through the years as I continue this is that, yes, I still live in the day-to-day world, but I find myself every day, at least at some point in the day, being able to have that, at some level, an experience of awe of all that's around us, and so much more of that higher self that we have. And in time and in practice, as we apply this, and as the Edgar Cayce reading is also put, this is great, but you have to apply it, we'll find that. We'll find that peace. And not only peace, but we'll find more of that just wonderful feeling of awe. It's kind of, as I said, it's the experience. Words and symbols will take us so far, in the map. And it's just like, looking on a map of the Grand Canyon, or even looking at a picture of the Grand Canyon. Incredible
Absolutely.
stuff. But being there is that incredible awe. So we all have that ability, and it's just having patience with ourselves and taking it one step at a time.
Absolutely. And you make a great point. We do all really have that ability, and Cayce made that incredibly clear. One of the other things he made really clear was this whole idea of psychic ability, and we do all have that. These are all things that, as you said, you gotta push through. You gotta continue to be patient and find the steps. They'll all be laid out in front of you as you keep going. And the key is also to stay determined. If you're looking for truth, keep at it, and eventually it will be uncovered and revealed to you. I guess in talking about this whole idea of cultivating your psychic ability, you're also a featured presenter for the A.R.E, and you do a lot of volunteer talks, but also a lot of talks at the featured conferences as well. And in saying that, you're a featured presenter at the upcoming A.R.E conference in Virginia Beach, and this one's entitled "You Are Psychic: A Step-by-Step Course for Advancing Your Intuitive Potential." And it's from September 25th through the 27th. That'll be next month, later on this month. And can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect from your presentation in particular, Don?
Sure. I mean, it's a wonderful conference. It's a Friday through Sunday conference, and I'll be speaking Friday night. And my aspect of it is I'll be talking about the journey of the idea of becoming psychic, of becoming intuitive, because as Edgar Cayce put it, he said psychic is of the soul, and a psychic is of the spirit. And as we develop that, we develop those psychic and intuitive abilities, and it's a combination of the learning and knowledge with application, with practice and experience. And this this conference is exactly that. There's going to be a lot of experiential, not only learning, but experiential work with it, of practicing it. And it's a start. This is a weekend. Psychic is of the soul. It's what we develop, through practice, through, following it. Cayce himself, when asked, said, not only are we all have the ability to be psychic or are psychic, and it's just developing what is naturally ours, is that we can be our own best psychic. It's accepting it and practicing it. It's like anything else. Like this journey, you don't start off doing calculus. You learn arithmetic, and you work your way up through algebra and geometry and whatnot, so you understand it. So this gives you the beginning understanding of it and the ability to develop it within ourselves. I mean, interestingly, the idea of becoming psychic, when that came out in the readings, they pursued it of, well, okay, what do we need to do this? And what actually came out of it were two thin volumes called The Search for God Material, Volume 1 and 2, that are absolutely incredible. And it's really a spiritual philosophy. But as you develop that connection, that to the universal consciousness, to the noosphere, to the consciousness within the oneness within us all, and almost as a byproduct of developing that, or I shouldn't say a byproduct, but part of it is that ability to be psychic or intuitive. And we all, and I'll be speaking of this journey, of what Cayce said, of what other schools of thought have said in their experiences of it, some personal experiences of my own, that all bring this forth, this inspiration, this gift, this ability that we all innately have, but kind of push off to the side. It's funny, we call it, it's in throughout cultures. We call it, in one aspect, women's intuition. Because that's women's intuition. But on the male side, you could say, we kind of accept it by saying, it's our gut instinct. I get a chuckle. I think one of the most popular shows in the U.S. is NCIS, and one of the lead characters in this, kind of detective series, Gibbs, who's very straightforward, very pragmatic, very pragmatic. What he talks about is how he just, figures things out is sometimes it goes by the male way of that kind of intuitiveness is his gut instinct. We have these terms to kind of come around it, in a very, obtuse ways, but it's talking about the same thing, that we have this, and we probably, most of us have experienced it in the very least in dreams, let alone in deja vus and other things, but we can develop this, and we can. It's part of that journey along the lines of bringing heaven and earth together, and that higher consciousness that truly taps into everything.
Absolutely. Don, thank you so much for sharing all that. It's really, really been wonderful listening to you. As a final question, I want to pose to you, what most has you excited right now as you look around, both in your own research and any research that's going on around you, or any of the newest findings, or where you can see where we're headed with, just this idea of consciousness and how, these new discoveries that are coming to light. What has you most excited right now as you look into the future?
Oh gosh, there is so much going on, and so much, showing the different connections of, how, interestingly, in the spiritual symbolism, the sacred geometry, where it comes from, and what science is finding, not only what they're finding in meditation. I mean, they've been around for thousands of years, and I get a chuckle, and I get it, the scientific method. They know it's been around for science, thousands of years, but they always were saying, it's subjective, it's in your mind. Well, yeah, meditation, it is in your mind. But now that science has developed machines that can measure it, and then they see that, oh my gosh, yeah, the alpha waves change, the beta waves change. It has these physical, things that happen to the brain, to the body, that there's now, there's more to this. But wouldn't say that before because they couldn't measure it. And I understand, you might say, the kind of the limits or the protocol of science of having to do that, but it's also showing so much of the spiritual philosophies are just, the other side of the coin. Science and spirituality are just two sides of the same coin. Recently, besides the meditation and more discovery of these sites, one example, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is an incredible site, hard to get to right now with all the difficulties because it's near Syria. They have excavated some of the site, and they found these stone pillar circles like Stonehenge, and they've uncovered 4 of them, and we're talking, anywhere from 20 to 30 ton stone carved pillars, in circles in like Stonehenge, and they have confidently dated them to 9500 BC, which is throwing archaeology on its head, in that for the longest time they said, well, there wasn't any megalithic huge stone building before 3000 BC because civilizations weren't around and they couldn't do it. And suddenly now here's one 9500 BC. And from research they continue to be doing there in ground penetrating radar, of the 4 stone circles they've uncovered, they believe there's at least another 16 still buried. And from the depth and where they're buried, they think they could be well another 3,000 years even older. So, ideas of the pyramid being built in 10,500 BC, or civilizations having the ability to do this, is being pushed further and further back, where it was thought ludicrous before. Now they're kind of trying to figure out, well, we were supposed to be hunter-gatherers, what's going on here, not civilizations. And then you have the science side, recent science from NASA and from the CERN Institute, interestingly, are saying that the universe, and you can Google this or find the articles, the universe itself was created from vibration. And that's another theme through Cayce, that all started from vibration, from waves, from energy. Now their science is confirming that all came from vibration. And this is almost a climatic concept of that materiality came from, vibration from sound. The sound actually, appropriately so, the Big Bang theory, which cosmologists and physicists accept. Interestingly enough, the Big Bang theory that's accepted by physicists came from another Jesuit priest. But they're finding now that, and confirming that it was from this and the sound of it that the universe was created, again, following spiritual philosophies. If you want to go to the Eastern tradition, the word that created the sound that created creation, Om. In Western traditions, God spoke, and there was sound, and spoke and said, let there be light. There was sound before there was light. So it's fascinating how it's all really starting to culminate together. Meditation being scientifically validated, though it's always been there and was always valid. They can just prove it. The idea of the universe becoming created by sound in spiritual philosophies is now being confirmed. So I find this very exciting, and sharing this with everyone, and because amidst with that, and I love the part of the Cayce readings, to know oneself, to be oneself, yet one with the whole, this is not only a journey for all of us to oneness, but it's also our individual, our personal journey, which is just as exciting. So that's, just some of it, that it's just incredible and a wonderful journey.
And Don, what I love about everything that you brought to light here during our interview is that it truly is a humbling and blessed time to be around, to see the culmination of all these things come to light, both through scientific discoveries, through these spiritual discoveries that are happening. You really get to see the culmination of it, like you said, and we're bearing witness to it, which is such a beautiful thing, and it's so special to get to witness that.
Yeah, it is, and I know people can look around and think that where's the world going? Well, and actually, there was actually a recent study done last year by Harvard Dr. Stephen Pinkerton, I believe it was, and just very briefly, he did a study of apples to apples, you might say, of violence and the turmoil we've had in the last 5,000 years of civilization. And his determination is that when you really measure them to populations that were and that we have now and what's going on, that he feels that this is actually the most peaceful time on Earth. It may not seem that way, because of media, I think, but in apple-to-apple comparison, there's the evidence that it's actually the most peaceful time amongst all this turmoil, and to take heart in that, and that we can all have an impact, have an effect, in our own, as a small ripple that turns into waves in our own little ponds, to continue that.
Absolutely. Wonderful message. Thank you, Don. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Don. It's truly, truly been a pleasure listening to you today, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it. You're such a wealth of wisdom, and we got to have our conversations when I was in Virginia Beach. It's just such a pleasure listening to you, and thank you so much for just continuing to do what you do and continue to seek, and also just to share that with us. We appreciate that.
And Brent, this has been an absolute pleasure. It's good to talk to you again, and thank you for allowing me to share, because it is, I think, a wonderful journey and one to be shared with everyone.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Don. Take care.
You too.
Now, don't miss your chance to be a part of a one-of-a-kind A.R.E. tour led by Don Carroll himself through New Mexico and Mesa Verde. This tour takes place from October 24th through the 31st. And if you'd like more information or to register for this or other tours put on by the A.R.E., you can visit our website at edgarcayce.org/tours. Don is also a featured presenter at the upcoming A.R.E. conference here in Virginia Beach titled You Are a Psychic, a step-by-step course for advancing your intuitive potential. This takes place from September 25th through the 27th. And if you'd like to register for this conference or any others offered by the A.R.E., you can visit our website, as always, at edgarcayce.org/conferences. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Don's incredible eye-opening book titled Sacred Geometry and Spiritual Symbolism, The Blueprint for Creation. If you'd like a copy, you can pick it up at arecatalog.com. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment and MoreTalk.tv, I'm your host, Brenton Bickerstaff, encouraging everyone to seek out truth and strive to always bring together heaven and earth within yourself. Thank you so much for tuning in to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Hope everyone has a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week. Much love. And now it is time for the Thought for the Day here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. And joining us in the Thought for the Day today is, as always, Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure, Brent. Thank you once again for having me. It's always a treat to be here.
My pleasure. And if you can go ahead and read the Thought for the Day today from the Cayce readings and share a little bit of your personal thoughts on it.
I'd be happy to. This reading, or this thought, comes from reading 1546-1. Prayer is just as scientific as the knife in its individual field. Mechanotherapy or mechanical treatments are as effective in their individual field and are of the same source as prayer. If applied in the same way or manner, or with the same sincerity. This thought for the day is particularly meaningful for me. As a healthcare provider, I know there's a lot of ways to approach the needs of the individual, and I'm yet to find a method that fits everyone and heals everyone. People need what they need. The readings talk a lot about this. Some people might need an herb, some people might need a colonic, some people might need surgery, some people might need psychotherapy or hypnosis. I mean, there's a whole battery of things that the readings pulled upon to fit the needs of the individual. And which one was most important? Well, I think the glue of all of that is the intent. When you're praying, your intent is to offer help. When you're doing surgery, the intent is to offer help. When you're doing a chiropractic adjustment, or massage therapy, or acupuncture, or the whole list of things, if the intent is all the same, whether it be prayer, surgery, mechanical therapy, if the intent is to help, then it's all the same. It's coming from that same source. And that reflects back to our spiritual desire to be only helpful to the individual. You take what you have and you offer it with the intent to help. It's incredibly powerful. I'll tell you of an experience I had years and years ago. This lady was going to go on a cruise. She was in her 80s. Physically, she was really going through some challenges, and she asked me to come over to her house to work on her, and I did. And, I was doing a lot of mechanical therapy, being a doctor of chiropractic, and, I can't say any of it seemed to help her very much. And so I said, well, let's try this. Just, lie comfortably. And I held her head on the top of her head and the back of her head. And I just quietly asked for help for this individual, whatever she needed. Because at that point, I can honestly say I had no idea what she needed. I had tried all of my stuff, picked up all of my clues, applied my stuff, and not much was happening. So I just sat there and held her head and offered this prayer with the intent to be of help to her. And it felt like there was a real peace that came through me. I think it came through her because she started snoring, and she was lying down on her couch, so I just let myself out. And the next day I called and couldn't reach her. And I called the next day. I couldn't reach her. And finally, after about 2 to 3 weeks, she gave the office a call. And I said, where have you been? She said, out on my cruise. She said, I don't know what you did, but it was exactly what I needed. And I just have to laugh because I have no idea what I did. And sometimes you have to let it all go. But when the intent is there, magic can happen because that source is coming from the creative forces. When the intent is there, magic can happen. But that's really important for that intent to be there, whether it be prayer, whether it be surgery, whether it be herbs or mechanical manipulation of some manner. I think it comes down to that inner intent so that the creative forces can work through us.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that story. That's wonderful. And it really shows you this principle that Cayce's talking about in this thought. It shows it in action because, as you say, you don't know what you did, but it's all about your intent. You had good intent. You had healing intent. All you wanted to do was help heal this patient that you had, and you also put faith in knowing that there's something bigger out there that works with us to help heal ourselves. And in a sense, you worked as a channel to help facilitate that for this lady. And who knows what you did, but I think the beauty of what Cayce touches on here is he says prayer is just as scientific as the knife. And if you look in the research, some of the more current research, they're doing scientific studies on the healing effect of prayer, especially non-local healing effect. When you have a third party who doesn't know the patient who's suffering, but you have them pray for that person, they can scientifically document how it affects the healing process that person is going through and can help them to heal better. You also have plenty of other cases which it's beautiful because the scientific community is more interested in this now, where you have spontaneous remission and you have things that basically show the power of prayer or the power of the mind or the power of good intent. We're showing it and able to document it scientifically, and that I think that's something that's kind of new to the scientific field now. So when Cayce says prayer is just as scientific as all these other different forms of therapy or therapeutic healing techniques, he was so far ahead of his time. He was, in a sense, telling us that kind of look out, because I'm telling you now, there's science behind prayer and what it can do for the human body and its ability to heal. But it's going to take, as it always does, it'll take science a little bit of time to catch up. And it's just also an important reminder for me as an individual to continue to not only pray, but also to have a good intent and bring that into everything that you want to do. And that in a sense boosts your potential to its highest it can possibly be, to help people, to be of service, which of course, as we've talked about in previous Thought for the Days, is the core foundation of why we're here, is to be of service to each other.
Yes. There's some fascinating readings that he did when he was trying to help the Glad Helpers prayer group really develop. And they talk a lot about what you were just talking about. And now we're at a point where you've also mentioned there's scientific validity, or at least the research behind, boy, something is happening here. When you take a look at the response to whatever the treatment is, whether it be prayer just by itself or prayer with an application of something else, the responses are really quite incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times the scientific community gets a lot of flack because in the past the scientific community has not been the most open-minded, but a beautiful thing that we're seeing now is the more open-mindedness going on. Because when you have something like these studies that we talk about, they may not know, they can't say for sure that prayer is what's causing people to heal and recover quicker, but they're open to the idea that to say, humble themselves and say, well, I don't know exactly if this is what's causing it, but I'm willing to put more time, energy, and effort into figuring out if it really is prayer, if it really is these alternative healing modalities that are accomplishing what our traditional medical sources have failed to give us. So it's beautiful just to see that open-mindedness that we don't know what the future holds, but it's bright.
It is bright. It's very bright.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us, as always, on the Thought for the Day. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's great to be here, Brent. Thank you again for having me. Have a great day.
Of course, my pleasure. Take care.